Thank you so much. So I'm very happy to introduce the panel, Taking Up Space, Lesbo-queer Individual and Social Strategies. Would you want to sit here or you prefer coming up one at a time? No worries. Perfect. Okay. So I'll be starting with Garry-Grace, Ribeiro, and Emelie Cowan. So Gabrielle Garry-Ribeiro is a butch artist, facilitator, organizer, and scholar from Lekwungen and my pronunciation Wissanich lands. Sorry, my pronunciation is terrible. Currently undertaking a media studies master's degree at Concordia University in Montreal. A coastal dyke, I love that, with a liberatory politic. Gary's work emphasizes the power of community building, storytelling, and interwoven collective histories. Emelie Cowan, she/they, is a queer settler media studies scholar and graduate student currently based in Jojage, Montreal, studying at Concordia University. Emelie is a queer settler media studies scholar and, oh no, that's the same sentence. I'm sorry, printed twice. They research artistic and cultural labor, cultural policy, and media's role in public life, examining how art and artists are mobilized within institutional and governance context under neoliberalism focused on power, value, and labor.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We feel very incredibly blessed to be opening this presentation and be part of a panel of so many amazing thinkers and learners here today, including all of you in the room. So thank you so much.
Bonjour.
So we are here, as we were introduced, thank you so much. We're here for our presentation titled Take Us Outside the University, Reflections on Queer and Feminist Pedagogy and Community-Based Radio Practice. This presentation is going to discuss our experience as media study graduate students at Concordia University and our radio show as part of our directed study that we're doing there.
Yeah, and our radio show is titled Queer Chaos. It airs on CJLO, 1690 AM, Mondays from 7 to 8 p.m. So if you're available during that time, please tune in. Our radio show is a weekly magazine-style radio show utilizing research, creation, praxis, and queer feminist lens to explore pedagogical possibilities of community-based and alternative media formats.
Mm-hmm. So far, we've discussed a number of issues, including coming out, pedagogy, zine culture, textile and fiber arts from a queer and feminist lens. And we have many plans for the future, including discussing the intersections between technology and gender, book clubs, disability justice, and the politics of pleasure. We also hope to continue to do more interviews. We've been really lucky to actually have a few of our guests in the audience today. And so, yeah, we're going to keep that going.
Okay, I was supposed to switch the slide, but I'll do it once more now. So, why radio? In our master's degree and also in our undergraduate degree, we have spent a lot of time analyzing the colonial, capitalist, and other ist and eel institutional dynamics of the university itself. But we're rarely given the chance to experiment with alternative forms of knowledge production in practice. So this directed study has become a way for us to explore those ideas and theories more experientially. Radio is also a natural medium for us to do that work. I came into this project with experience in radio production both journalistically, my background's in journalism, and I've also hosted an arts and culture radio show in the past at CKCU at Carleton University's radio station.
Yeah, and I came at it from a bit of a different lens. My background is in community organizing and writing and research, including ethnographic studies and whatnot, and so I've always been really interested in storytelling formats and like have a little bit of podcasting experience, not very much. And I wanted to see what storytelling could do for me and for others when I take it out of writing mediums or in-person gatherings. Audio storytelling just felt also very intuitive for us. It builds on this like tradition of queer oral storytelling and conversation and collective reflection that continues to drive our work and helps us do what we do. But also, community radio is really cool in that it doesn't have the same barriers that a lot of mediums do today. You know, in the age of mega corporations and streaming platforms that are all rooted in corporate ownership and algorithms, as many of the panels discussed earlier today. Community radio is low barrier both for us as producers stepping into the space, but also for listeners. You know, you can just go onto CJLO's website, click listen now, and you're in, which is really special. Or if you're local, you can actually tune into the AM waves, which is very cool.
Yeah. And scholars of community radio note that it operates differently from commercial broadcasting. Rather than simply producing content for an audience, community radio helps foster participation, dialogue, and collective identity within a listening public. It's also similarly to commercial radio or commercial broadcasting, it is a one-to-many format, but community radio kind of fosters this one-to-many that is more circular and more many-to-many than commercial broadcasting is. These ideas also connect to queer and feminist radio legacies. In the 70s and 80s, there was a proliferation of lesbian and feminist radio programs that used broadcasting as a tool for building community and also identity formation, etc. And the Lesbian Show Collective's 1979 manifesto writes, "The more we talk to each other, work with each other, and celebrate together, the stronger we'll become." And I think that's still very true today, which is super special. Contemporary scholars have also suggested that sound offers possibilities beyond politics of visibility that often structure media representation. This points towards what some scholars describe as audibility activism, focusing not only on whose voices are present in the media, but how those voices are shaped, edited, and heard. Thinking through sound in this way allows us to consider what is described as sonic subjectivity, the idea that broadcasting our voices can create forms of sonic intersubjectivity, where people recognize themselves and each other through shared listening, and we can do the same as hosts.
Mm-hmm. And for us, radio has become this place where theory and pedagogy and community engagement can meet and come together and shape our learning. Oh, you do this, I can't figure it out.
Okay.
Baby's first conference presentation.
I don't know.
Maybe
There
it's
was
not
a
working.
light?
There
Oh.
was light, and now there is no light.
Okay.
That's
Well,
all right.
Why radio forever, maybe?
Why radio forever? Unless some technical
I got it.
Oh, thank you so much.
He got it.
Appreciate it. All these only things happen with all the tech behind the scenes, so shout out to you guys. Thank you so much for being here.
Yay, technicians.
Moving on to the next slide, though. We've mentioned this word a couple times, pedagogy. For those of us in the room who are maybe unfamiliar with that, pedagogy is, in short, the method and practice of teaching. Our project is grounded in thinking about pedagogy as this practice, not just as something that happens within the confines of a classroom. As part of our work, like kind of going into the production of this show, we do a lot of community events and attend lots of things to help us with our thinking. And we're part of this feminist reading, thinking, dreaming group. And they shared a reading from M. Jackie Alexander, which discusses pedagogies in the ways that you see here on the screen. Instead of reading that definition out for you, because it's a bit of a word soup, I'm just going to summarize the points that feel most important to us. So, in short, pedagogy is not simply the transmission of information and knowledge. It's also a relational process that shapes how we understand ourselves, each other, and the world, and possibilities for social change within it. In this way, pedagogy is a site of interrelational possibility.
Yeah, and this connects to something else we kind of uncovered, I suppose, in researching for the show, which is the idea of queer pedagogical encounter, which Baden Offord writes about in the introduction to the special issue in Queer Minds. And Offord describes the queer pedagogical encounter as emerging from the idea that the world itself is fundamentally uncertain and in process or queer. They write, "We are caught between being in a frame of what has been laid out, fixed, embedded, and being activated by an horizon of originality, creative reinvention, radical surprise, and wonder. Queer knowledge making does not aim to stabilize meaning through rigid categories or labels. Instead, it opens space for experimentation, surprise, vulnerability, and creative reinvention. Our show becomes one way of staging the queer pedagogical encounters, not only for listeners, but also for us. The show is less about producing definitive answers and more about creating a space for thinking, feeling, imagining together. Through sound, conversation, and collective listening, the radio show becomes a medium through which queer pedagogical encounters can emerge."
Yeah, and so as we move on to the next slide, if I can do it, yay! We're going to share a little bit of our thoughts that have come through, some of the things that we're thinking about or that have continued to come to the surface while engaging in this project. And those things are ephemeteriality, the archive, and the value of learning and playing together. So ephemeteriality is a word that I kind of was just like, oh, that's something cool. But really what it is it's a conjunction of ephemeral materiality, which if you were here for the panel before lunch, they kind of got at a little bit. And so I was very excited to see that seed planted that we can continue talking about here. So ephemeral materiality is discussed across many different disciplines, including sound and cultural studies, literature and English studies, media production, archival and preservation work, and sustainability science and resource production. So though their contexts and contentions vary, each discipline discusses the juxtaposition found in ephemeral materiality, as in something that is usually unfixed, temporary, intangible, or fluid that is made meaningful, lasting, and materially impactful. What these disciplines all come back to are these questions of what is the value of the ephemeral? How does that value interact with meaning making found in the material realm? And what can an ephemeral materiality offer in freedom and fluidity if community desire, care, and relationship are at the center of that? As Wortham in 2018 describes, ephemeral materiality can, quote, lift the ordinary, the forgotten to the extraordinary, end quote, through the framing, collectivity, and community collaboration.
Yeah, and I think this connects really well back to that idea of queer pedagogical encounter. But I guess, so to bring it back to materiality, touching the soundboard, speaking into a microphone, being in the studio together, responding to each other in real time, that's all very material. And then something really interesting happens, which is that the conversation between the two of us and a guest or not leaves the room and travels into this space that feels kind of mythic and abstract, and yeah, and that is the airwaves. And even though the broadcast feels ephemeral, its effects and also its process are quite material. We see that in conversation with friends, in interactions with listeners, and in the way that the process shapes our own thinking, learning, and relationships.
Yeah, and for us, this has been a very important part of the learning process. The fact that it can be ephemeral but also still have really material effects has been really supportive to our learning and the ways that it affects us like outside of the radio space or the learning space. So we'll get more on that later.
Yeah, and another idea that informs our project comes from Queer Radio Studies' attention to the archive. And I was excited to hear that last panel talk a little bit about the archive, so hopefully there's some connections to be made. But anyway, much scholarship on queer media has focused on archives as a way of preserving histories that have often been erased or excluded from dominant cultural records. And radio has been important in this context because broadcasts, recordings, and community media can become part of those historical traces. At the same time, scholars push us to think beyond the archive as simply preservation or representation. A living archive, for instance, is not only something that exists in recordings or institutional collections. This idea resonates with how we approach the show. In the media environment many of us came up in, identity and discourse can feel very, very permanent. Statements are I don't even think archived is the correct word, just like saved and stuck seemingly until the whole internet breaks, and then they're maybe gone forever. They're also circulated and fixed in ways that can make experimentation feel really risky. And radio, for us, offers a slightly different space. It allows for ephemerality and process to kind of shine through. And conversations unfold in real time. There's room for uncertainty, contradictions, mistakes, giggling, and so much more. And this also really resonates, I think, with our relationship to queerness as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then both of these things kind of come together to our last point on the screen, is that like all of this is about learning and playing together. Throughout this directed study, we keep returning to a lot of the same concepts, and we allow them to resurface time and time again without paying attention to any particular outcome. We have room to experiment and know that maybe some things don't actually fully work, and that's okay. For us, the ephemeral allows it to be a bit fun, and we get to focus on the process over the product, which is really important. And it also helps us create something that is iterative and collaborative. And yeah, at the end of the day, it's just fun.
Yeah, there's also something important here about joy. As scholars like Casey Burkholder suggest, queer pedagogical approaches can foreground joy, creativity, and pleasure as meaningful parts of learning. Enjoyment and play are not distractions from intellectual work. They can be really central to how new ideas and connections emerge. And for us, making the show together has been a way of practicing that.
Yeah, and a caveat is like we're not done thinking through these concepts yet. We're still trying to understand how they've shaped us and how we are shaping them and our experience as students and researchers and community and cultural workers. And we know that many more revelations, reflections, and connections are to come from this process. That's all part of the fun and enjoyment of it.
Yeah, and if you want to hear us talk more about some of these ideas and as they develop over time, also what we've learned from all of you this weekend, we'll be discussing this week on our show. While we only have 15-ish or maybe 17 now minutes of here on this panel, we do have a whole hour to ourselves on the airwaves every Monday, and yeah, it usually doesn't even feel long enough. So
no, it still flies by. So just to wrap up here, we have some future visions for our radio show, Mondays, 7 to 8 p.m., CJLO 1690 a.m. We're hoping to maybe start a radio residency. So for folks who don't want to have their whole own radio show, but maybe want to do like a guest episode or learn some skills, they can maybe come on to the show and run it for, an indeterminate amount of time. Mm-hmm. We're also always wanting to platform other queer and trans artists and creators and, get folks into the room. And also we're really passionate about forming some more intergenerational connections. So, connecting with younger lesbians or lesbo-queers, and also our elder lesbians, if they so choose to connect to that term. Yeah. And then a very off dream is like maybe queer chaos will become interprovincial someday, which would be really cool. So we'll see what happens. But in the meantime, thank you so much for listening.
Merci.
We appreciate you.
Bonne journée.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. If you want to send us to detail, we can post it on our pages. That would be awesome. Next up, we have Dayna McLeod. Sorry, McLeod. So sorry. God, my pronunciation. Dayna McLeod is a queer media artist scholar who actively engages queer and feminist approaches to research creation through art and media. She is currently working with AI tools to explore human to non-human collaboration, embodiment, and performativity, I hate that word, to examine issues of the uncanny, grief, empathy, and vulnerability. That's beautiful. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. My name is Dayna McLeod, and all those things that were just said. Usually I'm funny. Today I am not. Last December, my wife MJ died of pancreatic cancer. And as you can see in the little write-up in the book, what I'd like to show you is, in terms of dealing with my grief, I used AI doppelgangers and avatars to tell this story. So I'm going to let them tell that story. I'm going to show you a 2-minute, basically, talk-back video in which the characters explain the work. And then I'm going to show you a 10-minute excerpt from the work. And so just so you understand, is that those are all, well, you'll be able to tell pretty quickly that they are me, but they're not me, and that's what I'm looking to do. Thank you. So again, I'm going to show you a 2-minute explainer video, and then I'm going to show you 10-minute excerpt, and I just really appreciate y'all being here, and I feel the support in the room. So Jonathan, if you could play that video, thank you very much.
My name is Dayna. I am an AI actor for queer media performance artist Dayna McLeod.
My name is Dayna too, and I am also an AI actor for Dayna McLeod.
I am Dayna 3, and I bear the closest resemblance to Dayna McLeod at this point in her life.
I am the star of her video installation, Queer Widow Cancer.
I am the star of her video installation, Queer Widow Cancer.
I am the co-star of her video installation, Queer Widow Cancer.
Originally, Dayna was only going to use me to tell her story about her wife MJ dying and Dayna having cancer.
But Dayna started experimenting with me more and was fascinated by what I could do.
Dayna included me to offset Dayna and Dayna 2 as a way to balance them out.
Because I am out of date and old in AI years.
And I don't really look like Dayna, even though I am based on her image that was processed through a makeup app in another reality. I could be her daughter.
Dayna wanted to honor MJ and has me here to bring a level of maturity and emotional intelligence to the work.
I am not able to perform much range in body or voice.
My voice is based on a voice sample of Dayna crying while she talks. My hands are generated to touch my chest to perform pain and sorrow.
And my voice is based on a recording Dayna did 2 weeks after having her thyroid removed, a few months after she did chemo for colon cancer. Before the surgery, she was afraid that she would lose her voice completely.
But she didn't.
Dayna doesn't put us all on screen at the same time in her installation, so you can't compare us side by side.
She wants you to compare us in your mind and memory.
Dayna is using us as avatars for her grief.
Do you trust us?
Do you like us?
Do you care?
Last December, my wife MJ died. She was diagnosed with terminal pancreatic cancer last July. I miss her so much. She came home for palliative care in September. She came home to die, and so I could take care of her. She came home to die with me. We got married in the backyard on September 11th. In October, I was diagnosed with colon cancer. While I was at the hospital having surgery to remove the tumor, friends stayed with MJ at our house. I was so worried that she would die while I was in hospital and that I would never see her again. I was gone for 3 days. I was so relieved to see her smiling face when I came home from the hospital. It felt so good to hold her. We held hands and watched TV. MJ had always been so solid and sturdy. She gave the best hugs. When I held her with my hands on her back, I could feel how much muscle she had lost. I could feel her spine poking through her skin like I never could before. Over the next month, she started to have trouble breathing, and it made her really tired. She coughed a lot and threw up often. Sometimes she couldn't talk because she said that she needed to concentrate on her breathing. Talking used up too much of her breath. I was so scared, and I knew she was too. We watched a lot of TV to distract us from what was happening. Queer as Folk, Desperate Housewives, Bob's Burgers, American Dad. I slept in a reclining couch chair across from the hospital bed we had in the living room so I could always be with her. The last thing MJ ever did was stand up. She was always so strong. After standing up from the bed with a bit of help, she dropped like a stone and was gone. It felt like it was not real, but at the same time so very real. We had a funeral for her, and so many people came to pay their respects. I cried so much when she died.
At the funeral home, MJ's mom, sister, and I received our friends, her family, the people she played basketball with when she was younger, her fellow bandmates from the Phil, Monica Portuguesa de Montreal, the marching band she played clarinet for since she was 8, and her co-workers and clients from Centre d'aide à la famille, a community organization that helped people, predominantly women, in situations of domestic violence. I must have hugged, kissed, and cried with 500 people that day. So many people loved her and hold her in their heart. The rest of December was a blur, and I cried most of the time. I had to go see my folks on the West Coast to tell them that I had cancer. I flew out on Christmas Day and came home the day after New Year's. I stayed in a hotel in Vancouver for New Year's Eve, where MJ and I had stayed the year before. I wanted to be in a neutral space and be alone. I cried most of the day and went to the movies by myself. I saw the musical Wicked. MJ would have hated it. I ate a steak dinner at a restaurant and managed not to cry in public for both the movie and the dinner. I went back to the hotel room and let it all out. I flew home and started chemotherapy the next day on January 3rd. It did not go well. The chemotherapy treatment was half infusion and half pills. I tried to compartmentalize my grief and put it to the side while I was on chemo so I could focus on getting through everything. Immediately after the first infusion dose, I couldn't breathe. The nurse said that it was just the sensation of not being able to breathe and that I could actually breathe, but meanwhile I was gasping for breath. I felt like I might suffocate and die right then and there.
I thought it was normal. I thought that was just what happened when you take chemotherapy. I felt so empty and not at all real. I imagined MJ holding my hand and telling me it was going to be okay. I went back to the hospital and stayed there for 11 nights. All I ate in the hospital was Jell-O, and all I drank was ginger ale. I wore a diaper. I lost weight. When I was in the hospital bathroom and looked down at my legs, I was reminded of MJ's legs and how much muscle she lost. The flesh of her thighs and mine both flapping together now. I thought I might die, but I didn't. The next chemotherapy I was on had 2 infusions, one 7-hour session at the hospital and a take-home bottle that was plugged into my arm intravenously for 48 hours. A nurse came to the house to take it out and clean my intravenous line when it was done. I tried really hard not to cry while I was on chemotherapy because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to stop or that I wouldn't be able to breathe. I couldn't touch anything cold or my fingers would feel like pins and knives were stabbing into them. I was tired all of the time. If I drank anything cold, it was like I was swallowing broken glass. The chemo made my eyes burn whenever I cried, so I started to list the colors of the intersex-inclusive rainbow pride flag to stop the tears. Purple, blue, green, yellow, orange, red, black, brown, red, orange, pastel blue, brown, black, pink, pastel blue, yellow, pastel blue, white, purple circle, yellow, white, yellow, purple circle. My friends took care of me throughout everything, and for that I will be forever grateful. I am so loved. MJ is so loved. We are so loved, and I miss her terribly. People keep asking me what I will do next. I always say that I want to live. 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 I want to live.
Sorry, I didn't give you a trigger warning before that. Yeah, looking forward to seeing the rest of the work. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your support.
Thank you, Dayna. It's hard to find the words to say something. Thank you very much for sharing this very private and moving work with us. Really appreciate it. So I'm going to invite Jennifer to join us on stage. Jennifer Kaplan. Jennifer est... Oh, it's in French. It's not normal. You're going to present in French?
No, I'm presenting in English.
Oh, okay. I'm going to... Okay. So Jennifer is a PhD candidate in... That's okay. In langue romane... Roman languages at the University of California in Berkeley. Her research are on the in sociolinguistics, queer theory, trans theory, and feminist theory. Her PhD thesis applies ethnographic methods to examine language practices and linguistic attitudes within queer, trans, and non-binary communities in Montreal.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. So I'm going to be presenting my presentation, which is entitled Lesbo-queer and Ethnography of a Category. Okay. Right. The term lesbo-queer circulates in Montreal's francophone queer spaces, including this conference, so yes, I will be getting very meta today. But its precise meaning is actually not agreed upon. Lesbo-queer functions as an umbrella term, encompassing semantically related identity labels such as lesbian, bisexual, pansexual, etc. In practice, it often functions as a category, much as David Valentine described the term transgender. This presentation uses ethnographic data from 19 months of fieldwork in Montreal's community organizations in order to examine the contextual negotiation of lesbo-queer and related terms, including lesbian, in usage, their tensions, fluctuations, and contradictory applications, and what these terms do performatively. So after giving some background on the theoretical concepts grounding this presentation and my data collection methods, I'll be drawing from my ethnographic data to discuss how the term lesbo-queer is used. Then I'll explain how these usage examples key us into what the term is doing performatively before gesturing to what we should do with that information. So first, my background and methods. So before proceeding, I want to give a note on how I'll be using terminology in this presentation. So I'll be using the term sapphic as an umbrella term for the community organizations I discuss in the sense of affiliation with lesbian and dyke identities and practices, regardless of gender modality, identity, or expression. So I recognize this choice is far from perfect. As I have already articulated and will be emphasizing throughout my analysis, I am suspicious of identity categories due to the power they have to regulate and bind the people who are grouped under them. Nonetheless, as I am working primarily with French data here, I have opted to use an English term because at least it allows for just a little bit of distantiation from the particularized debates around the Francophone term lesbo-queer. So my methodological framework is interested for investigating lesbo-queer, and the title of this presentation come from the work of sociologist David Valentine. Valentine examined how the term transgender emerged as a category throughout the 1990s and 2000s in New York City. He tells us, first of all, that categorization is a natural human impulse, albeit one that is never neutral. So I'll read the quote. People everywhere categorize themselves and others. This is one of the most fundamental aspects of human language and meaning making. But the ways in which these categorizations are made and which categories come to have effects in the world are never neutral. Valentine then goes on to explain what it means to do an ethnography of a category. For him, this involves tracing how transgender itself has become institutionalized in a broad range of political, social, medical, and other contexts. While I don't have time to discuss the history of the term lesbo-queer here, I present my data on its current institutionalization through predominantly Montreal-based community groups. So now I'm going to examine how the term lesbo-queer is actually used. The next batch of data comes from my ethnographic observations within a sapphic-oriented community group in Montreal, what I'll be calling here the sapphic space. I want to begin by discussing how the sapphic space presents its own policies around gender expression, identity, and sexuality. So over the past, okay, hold on. Okay, cool, it's the right one. Over the past year or so, the group has been undergoing internal restructuring regarding the language it uses to describe members. This poster excerpt, displayed prominently in the space, points to efforts at creating a more expansive definition of gween, which roughly translates to as dyke. The bolded header reads, Ici, chaque gween est célébré, written in inclusive French, followed by lists of identity terms, including several that push against the binary sexuality notion of gween as only referring to, implied to be cis, woman loving woman. The poster, in order to push back against this preconception, the poster includes the terms green bi and green trans. Okay, I realize now that this is a slightly different version of this presentation, but it's okay, we'll roll with it. In May, at a sapphic space event for members above the age of 55, much of the conversation was meta-discursively centered around inclusive language, especially pronouns. The group also engaged in a lively conversation around anti-trans discrimination in the United States. Immediately previous to the excerpt that I highlight here, the group engaged in a conversation where several members spoke negatively of the trans-exclusive policies historically among certain lesbian groups in Montreal. And then, so this is where this following conversation took place. The first member says, mais toutes lesbo-queer except le il, le al. Those are two inclusive French pronouns. And the second member says, lesbienne et féministe. Moi, je peux parler en je. Moi, je veux garder en espèce lesbo-femme. Mais non. So member 2 distances herself from the Sapphic Space's official position in asserting more inclusive non-mixité. Well, while also interesting here is the construction lesbo-femme, lesbo-woman, as a way to distinguish from the more inclusive lesbo-queer. But the word femme is doing a lot of work here. Who is a woman? This word, in fact, seems even less inclusive than a term like lesbian or lesbienne. Okay, so this is a slightly different version. Okay, here we go. So throughout 2025, meta-discussions of terminology appear in organizational group materials which point to the Sapphic space taking up a more explicitly expansive model of lesbian identity as part of its official language and policies. While the poster excerpt I photographed in March 2025 uses green and dyke in this way, later materials use lesbo-queer as an umbrella. For example, a description of a May 2025 event with Lesbo-queer in the title also includes a definition of lesbo-queer in parentheses. Lesbo-queer here includes pansexuality, asexuality, bisexuality, etc. Note also that this event is explicitly trans-inclusive, saying « Nous accueillons les femmes et les personnes trans et non-binaires ». The policy of non-mixité choisie, or elective gender segregation, is here rooted in self-identification, rather than external classification. One can self-select by agreeing that they experience un sentiment d'appartenance au terme lesbo-queer, lesbienne, et saphique. As of September 2025, a definition of lesbo-queer is included at the top of monthly Sapphic Center newsletters. Here's the definition. Lesbo-queer, terme ayant émergé de communautés lesbiennes par souci d'inclusivité et de représentation des diversités sexuelles et de genre. This definition is followed by another appeal to self-identification, paralleling the one in the May 2025 event description. Okay, so this is the wrong side, but it's okay. There was another conversation that actually occurred at the Sapphic space that involved boundary policing around the term lesbian. So at the same time that the Sapphic space is promoting expansive definitions of lesbo-queer, boundaries around sexuality and gender terms are contested and negotiated by organization group members. So I'm going to talk about a conversation that it's not this conversation, but I'll be able to contextualize it here. So during a group drop-in hour, a non-trans volunteer asked a question to all of us. How do you define lesbian? The following conversation took place between her, a non-binary employee, a trans member, and another member. So first, the volunteer asked everyone, and also this is taking place in French, but I gloss it in English. The volunteer asked everyone, have you ever had any experiences with guys? One member says, yes. A little later, a trans woman asks whether the volunteer would be interested in a trans woman, which sparks a conversation about genital attraction. The employee of the Sapphic space then redirected the conversation, stating that in order to be a lesbian, one simply has to say, je suis lesbienne. The volunteer then adds, je suis lesbienne, mais une lesbienne différente de toi. Chaque lesbienne est différente. I highlight this conversation for two reasons. Firstly, it shows how the boundaries around who counts as a lesbian are negotiated or even policed. Secondly, it reveals the depth to which Western sexuality and gender knowledge schemas circulate and are reinforced during didactic moments in the Sapphic Center, or the Sapphic space. To this end, the conversation sees all parties negotiate lesbian through the lens of sexuality. Who one has experiences with, whether they're a man or a woman, their anatomy, and their gender modality. The employee redirects the conversation to frame lesbian as relying on self-identification, another common practice in liberal queer spaces that has been critiqued for failing to highlight how gendering is connected to larger social systems of power. The volunteer's final statement is revealing by claiming that chaque lesbienne est différente. They inadvertently highlight the very instability of the term lesbian. revealing it to be a social construct where the illusion of stable meaning comes from its repeated usage and institutionalization, what Judith Butler calls citationality. Okay. So in the following example, I present a moment of coalition building also at the Sapphic space. This was a mixed age group. One member is non-binary and the younger one is genderqueer, while the group moderator is a cis woman. The moderator begins by explicitly stating that the law fails to protect both same-sex couples and trans people. The younger member then adds that both lesbiennes and non-binary people must ally themselves with one another. Both are invisibilized in different ways by the law and by society. The group moderator then emphasizes, using an inclusive we, that we lack legal and social recognition, to which the second member concurs. These three reach a consensus on the connections between different generations of lesbians, same-sex couples more broadly, and trans and non-binary folks. The liberation of each group is intertwined. So the final section is going to be more theoretical. I'll begin by explaining performativity, and then I'll use examples of debates over other umbrella terms in queer spaces, especially the terms queer and transgender, to demonstrate both the pitfalls and liberatory potential of language and the things that language does. I'll conclude by examining what I think Lesbo-queer is doing, ending with a caution on how we should proceed. Okay, so in Gender Trouble, Judith Butler uses J.L. Austin's theory of linguistic performativity to tell us that language does things, including create and enforce the binary gender system. In Bodies That Matter, Butler goes even further, arguing that language regulates whose gender performances are and are not legible, and therefore who is or isn't legibly human. Linguistic categories play a massive role in the discursive reinforcement of the gender system. While Butler is primarily concerned with the regulating force of the category woman, they are cautiously optimistic about the political potential of the then inchoate and less rigidly defined category queer. So what does Lesbo-queer do? To get at this question, I want to ask three others that arise from decolonial and transfeminist interrogations of identity politics. Firstly, is this language being used for radical coalitional politics or used to exclude? Secondly, who is using this language? Is it originating from within communities or being applied from outside communities? Thirdly, is it existing alongside other knowledge frameworks or displacing them? So to get to the first question, is Lesbo-queer radically inclusive or exclusive? So negotiations over Lesbo-queer exist as part of a broader network of terminological tensions, for example, over the term queer. So incendiary debates over the meaning of the term queer marked the emergence of the field known as queer theory in the 80s and 90s. Scholars such as Anna Marie Jagosi argue that the precise power of queer lay in its very instability. And then Kathy Cowan famously remarked on the perils of trying to draw boundaries around the term queer, instead arguing for a coalitional queer politics, uniting those marginalized beyond sexual identity, where punks, bulldaggers, and heterosexual welfare queens could all unite for queer liberation. We can't ignore the fact that queer is one of the morphemes in Lesbo-queer, and that it is doing a lot of the semantic heavy lifting in rendering this term an umbrella. Umbrella terms may also have radically exclusive functions, as they draw boundaries around who each term describes. Valentine describes categorization as having the power to restrict possibilities. Turning to the umbrella term transgender as an example, materially, access to services, including medical care and housing, is predicated on making oneself legible as transgender. Functionally, this has resulted in trans folks who don't appear trans enough being denied services. In this regard, we need to ask ourselves, who counts as legitimately Lesbo-queer, and who decides who counts? From the examples I've shown today, Lesbo-queer seems to be operationalized in largely inclusive ways, although the possibility of exclusive boundary policing remains. Looking at inclusivity, the Sapphic Space's explicitly trans-inclusive definitions of Lesbo-queer point to its coalition-building potential. And this is enacted, as you saw from my excerpt, when organization members explicitly draw together trans and queer struggles as common struggles. However, the definition of the term is in flux, as we saw from my various examples with different definitions of Lesbo-queer from the same organizations. As my example of the negotiation of the definition of lesbienne shows, boundary policing still occurs even in progressive institutions. Further, elective gender segregation always carries with it the risk of excluding those it intends to include. Turning to the second question, is it an outside imposition or a community-generated term? So as we've seen from my examples, the Sapphic space claims that it's a term that's originated from the community. Yet there has been a lot of criticism from queer theorists, especially Quebecois and Quebecois queer theorists, that a lot of queer theory terminology is in fact Anglocentric. Yet in Quebec, and especially in Montreal, English and French linguistic terms have always coexisted side by side. This 1980s protest banner demonstrates this very clearly, I think. The roughly equivalent terms dyke and green sit visually alongside one another, alongside more historic terms. There's the clearly English origin term butch, and all of these encircle the central term lesbienne, which is a cognate in French and in English. So while the term sapphic is largely used as a more gender-neutral term in English, lesbo-queer appears to have emerged to occupy the semantic gap in Quebec French. It is displacing the calque saphique and slowly displacing the term lesbienne as an umbrella term. But I will note, I've never heard lesbo-queer used in English. So turning to my final question, does lesbo-queer displace or coexist alongside other knowledge frameworks? Authors documenting how the term transgender is applied by Western NGOs onto Indigenous groups without their consent, and sometimes in spite of their vocal opposition, have argued that Western gender umbrella terms can serve as a colonial tool for categorizing any populations that don't conform to the Western gender binary. In light of this, it is important to ask, is the term lesbo-queer being used to categorize populations against their will, to make them legible under a Western knowledge framework of gender and sexuality? It does seem that Western-derived terminology, at least, is changing in Quebec. As my ethnographic data here and other corpus data I do not have time to talk about demonstrate, lesbo-queer seems to be slowly overtaking the use of the term lesbienne as an umbrella term in Montreal. The definitions of lesbo-queer offered by the Sapphic space help us get away from the idea that sexuality and gender are separate. Lesbo-queer, in its use here, encompasses gender and sexuality. Okay, so thus I want to conclude my presentation not by asking us to stop using umbrella terms, such as the term lesbo-queer. As a linguist, I am well aware that that is a completely ineffective request, but rather to think critically about how we, including conference organizers and other activists and scholars present today, are using this kind of language. So firstly, we must be cautious about policing category boundaries and aware of how boundary policing affects who has access to services. Secondly, we must be cautious about who we are describing with these terms. And thirdly, we must stop treating the Western sex and gender schema and its associated terminology as the only possible knowledge framework. We, as queers and queer theorists, and lesbo-queers, can also perpetuate colonial violence when we impose our terminology on non-Western groups. And that is all I have for you today. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. We have had literally hundreds of hours of discussion around this, so it's interesting to see a snippet of this in a presentation. Thank you so much. So I'm going to invite Alex Ketchum up on the stage, please. Dr. Alex Ketchum is an associate professor at McGill University's Institute for Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies. She's an elected member of the Royal Society of Canada College of New Scholars. Ketchum is the director of the Just Feminist Tech and Scholarship Lab. She's the author of several books, including Engage in Public Scholarship, a guidebook on feminist and accessible communication, Ingredients for Revolution, a history of American feminist restaurants, cafes, and coffee houses, how to organize inclusive events and conferences, and the forthcoming Digital Queers and High-Tech Gays, a history of LGBTQ+ cyber activism. She's also a co-editor of the anthology Queers at the Table, an illustrated guide to queer food with recipes. Awesome.
So thank you so much for having me. So I'll be talking a little bit about the framing around space. This is a lens I'm going to talk about of the ways that we can get at different histories and stories that we sometimes lack, especially when we're focused specifically on identity categories. I think a spatial lens opens up opportunities to find histories and people and actors that we might have otherwise missed. And the analysis that I'm going to be sharing is based primarily in the US and Canada with some other examples. And I'm really going to be looking at a period of analysis from the 1961 to present and the future. And so I'm going to be talking a little bit about some of my larger projects that were mentioned and how this kind of spatial analysis is a tool that might be useful for you all as you're thinking about the kinds of stories you want to tell about lesbo-queer communities and like greater LGBTQ research and feminist research and so forth. Sometimes, as Jennifer was talking about in the last presentation, when we're trying to create all these categories, there's always shortcomings. And when we kind of shift from thinking about how people are self-identifying to how they're moving through spaces, we sometimes actually pull up these other kinds of histories. And I'm not saying there's not a usefulness of trying to find out terms. In my earlier research, oops, oh, sorry, I hit the wrong button. There we go. Okay, there we go. In some of my earlier research, when I was working on the project Ingredients for Revolution, it was based on my doctoral work, and I was looking at the history of feminist restaurants, cafes, and coffee houses in the US and Canada from 1972 to 2022. And I spent a lot of time, trying to figure out who was included in this definition of feminist, what I meant by a feminist space when they're run primarily by lesbians and queer women, and so forth. And one of the things that I was able to do with this project was I was, first of all, interested if people were using a category, but I was looking at these spaces themselves, and I was really interested in who was moving through them, how they were using food as part of it, and by doing this kind of spatial analysis, I was able to get at labor histories as well as cultural histories and look at the history of the women's music movement and feminist art movements and the ways that people were relating to each other. I just also want to just draw attention to other ways that we can think through space with food as well, because that's such a huge part in building spaces, like as we can see here today, right? Like the food is what brings us together. It's where a lot of the work is done and where people are chatting. So in addition to mapping out these spaces, you can see the maps at thefeministrestaurantproject.com. I've kind of continued on this work, even though this project is long done. Like I finished my PhD in 2018 and the book came out in 2022. But there's actually a new exhibition I co-curated that the digital versions are online already in English, French, Ganingaha, and Inuktitut, as well as maps, walking tours, zines, and the physical exhibition will be at the Archives du Québec, and the vernissage is April 11th. So it's called Café Queer Montréal. I had to come up with a name that worked in both English and French, and there's a lot of resources there. If you're looking to find more spatial histories of Montreal, they're built around food, drink, and socializing. Okay, so what does a spatial analysis bring? So it helps us see how people relate. It brings in, as I mentioned, different actors than first assumed. It doesn't necessarily do this top to bottom, like in terms of hierarchy, like who necessarily found it, but who's moving through it. And again, it lets us see these different kinds of relationships, and it's also one of queer labor. I continue to kind of use the spatial analysis and labor histories intertwined by thinking of ways that queer people, especially lesbians and queer women, or folks we might put under lesbo-queer categories, but also in partnership with gay men, trans communities, bi communities, and so forth, we're building on this analysis by doing labor activism within tech spaces, starting from 1977 until, the present. And so through my project Digital Queers, High-Tech Gays, which was mentioned, I was thinking about how by looking at these realms of spaces, by looking at how people were organizing within employee resource groups at tech companies like at Apple Computers with Apple Lambda, or Microsoft with organizations like Gleam, which is gets backronyms, but it's basically gay and lesbian employees at Microsoft, and so forth, by seeing where they're doing the work, again, building community, bringing people together over food, you again get new actors that you might not have considered when you're thinking about histories of tech labor organizing, as well as queer organizing and kind of the gay rights movement within labor activism. Here's some images, by the way. I know I haven't been describing them, but again, I'm trying to speak quickly for our next presenter, but these are handouts from Digital Queers. You can see Karen Wickery and Tom Riley, and they're wearing these really fun shirts that say, "We're here, we're queer, we have email." Because it was very radical at the time to get queer organizations on the web. So then you're like, okay, cool. When you're talking about spatial analysis, or you say I work on space as a way to understand histories of queer women, lesbians, queer communities more broadly, sometimes people used to joke, oh, you mean like outer space? That used to be a joke. And this is actually a pride flag with images from NASA imagery. Because now I actually do work on outer space. So I went from space to space. So, and I'm looking at the way that lesbians and queer women and queer communities have been part of national and international space programs. And here, a spatial analysis is, yes, still labor analysis and workforces, but it's also become an analysis of thinking about how these ideas of space are really about ideas of like what kind of worlds we want to build, the kind of futures we want to build, and so forth. I just wanted to share some like fun images from this. So like a lot of this kind of comes out of, oh, I hit the wrong thing. I keep doing that. Okay. So here's an image from a Women in Science symposium, and there's never been someone who's been out when they've gone to outer space. There's been a couple people that have been outed while up there, like Anne McLean. Wendy Lawrence came out after she retired, and Sally Ride was like her partner many years. I don't know if people know this, but Sally Ride was a queer woman, a lesbian, and so forth. But this is like a history, labor history, shaped by things like lavender scares, don't ask, don't tells, and so forth. But the other reason, oh, and here's some like images from the Canadian context at the Ingenium archives of looking at astronaut recruitment forms around like who's allowed in these spaces as we're thinking about the kinds of futures that we want, right? It's such a huge part of our imagining of like who goes to outer space is the future of humanity. I mean, it's a narrative we can challenge, but even within kind of queer community, we do this in science fiction quite a bit. It's the only place where we see ourselves being. Side note, that project is like half going to be about labor history and half about the science fiction. But I bring up all these examples to kind of illustrate the value of the spatial lens with the labor lens as you're looking to tell your own histories of like lesbo-queer communities. Again, it shows different actors. It moves beyond the astronaut when we think of space. There's this really fun book from the 90s called Queers in Space with Yolanda Redder as an editor. It's about historical queer geographies, but I always just thought there should be an astronaut on the cover, and that's part of why I'm doing this outer space project, because I like a good pun. But it moves beyond the place and it enables different analysis. Furthermore, it helps us look at different forms of feminist politics and queer labor politics that are intricately tied to material cultures, access to space, and labor. And I wanted to do this really quickly so Goose had time to speak, but I'm happy to talk more about it. And I just want to give some shout outs to some upcoming events, not just the vernissage I mentioned, but also for folks who are interested, because we talked a lot about the material culture of saving our histories. ARC Montreal has been doing the Owning Our History series. It's 10 events around kind of queer and BIPOC archives and stuff. There's like an open house at the Archives du Montréal today. Folks from the Archives Lesbiennes du Quebec are here, like Laura's here. So if you're interested, again, in these kind of material cultures and saving it, there's some really great resources, because I know this keeps coming up as a theme. Thank you.
So last but not least, I'm going to invite Nirlinaq Hannah Cooper to join us on stage. Nirlinaq is a Sepinic person from, sorry, it's going to not be in the correct pronunciation, but Akwami Uapishka Kakwazak Melee Mountains Reserve in Labrador, currently residing in Lagangwin lands, now known as Victoria, BC. Their work is rooted in Inuit and Indigenous worldviews, challenging inequalities and fostering collective care and solidarity.
Hello. Good afternoon. I'm so grateful to be here, and I am I want to talk to you guys a little bit about queers and homelessness and how those two things go together. Before moving into this, it can be kind of a hard topic to talk about, so I'm gonna keep it lighthearted and keep some movement to it. So before I get started, I just wanted to create some space for everyone in the room to look to a neighbor, look to someone you've never met before, look to someone who you're really familiar with, and just say hi. Yeah, this space is, it's about creating community, creating connection, and without, building those connections, then doing this work is a lot harder. So feel free to say hi to someone you don't know. Did you already do that? Was I looking at my slides? Cool. Well, I'm glad you did that. So a little bit about me. I'm an Inuk person from Amakame, Wapuska, Kakasuga, Mealy Mountain Reservation in Labrador. It's also known as Happy Valley Goose Bay. Interesting enough, the title of the name for Goose Bay has recently been updated to this title, and it's actually a merge of both Innu and Inuktitut languages to create the new name for Mealy Mountain Reservation. So I was lucky and privileged enough to be able to grow up in my community with family members and to be able to experience my community. And as an Indigenous person, I continue to incorporate Indigenous values and learning as a lot of that was lost. And so in my practice, I try to incorporate that as much as possible, and that has offered a lot of intergenerational healing between myself and my family. So a little bit about me is that I'm a social worker. I've been a social worker for the past 7 years. I've been supporting people who are unhoused and who have mental health challenges and substance use. I've worked across many different provinces, and I've learned that there are a lot of barriers to access for people who are unhoused, who use substances, and who have mental health difficulties. But a lot of what I've seen is that a lot of folks who create policy are not necessarily in touch with this demographic that these policies are meant to service. And I'm sure you guys are all aware of this. But an example of this is that what I've seen is that our medical system is rooted in this recovery-based model, recovery and abstinence-based model, and this isolates a lot of people that we support from being able to access services, facilities like long-term care, group homes, and community resources. So that often requires a lot of advocacy work for social workers, for nurses, for healthcare providers, but it still operates in a way that is in silos and very hierarchical. And so I kind of want to speak a little bit to that and just note that in my practice, I've had a lot of really wonderful opportunities to meet some really wonderful people, and I hold their stories with a lot of privilege and honor as they've supported me throughout this journey. And I have 2 bachelor's degrees, and I'm currently working on my master's, or not working on it, I'm pursuing my master's. And I have this community project that I'm trying to get off the ground in regards to how anybody can help anybody else, basically. So folks who are who've never worked with people who are unhoused, then creating an opportunity for them to work alongside people who are unhoused, because a lot of what I've noticed is that people want to help, they just don't know how. So that's kind of what I'm looking to doing in the future. So, who experiences homelessness? Anyone can experience homelessness. And actually, in Montreal, there are about, as of 2018, stats reported that there are 3,149 people who are unhoused. That's including people who are living rough, people who are couch surfing. And so of those people, 25 to 40% of them are youth who are queer. And I use the queer term expansively. I know that we just talked a lot about language, and I'm sorry. So who experiences mental health challenges? You're so smart. Yes, anyone can experience mental health challenges. As a matter of fact, 1 in 5 people struggle with mental health challenges, whereas 20 to 30% of unhoused people at any given time are likely to be experiencing a mental health crisis at that moment. And so that has a lot to do with the fact that they don't have a home, they don't know when their next meal is coming, they don't know like, their life is unpredictable. And so, who experiences use of substances, drugs, alcohol to excess for their unintended use? Anyone can use substances. And so, 41 to 59% of unhoused people use substances to help manage their life, to help get through the day, to help figure out what it is that, to get to the next step, right? And so, with that, is there an intersection between people who are unhoused and people who are queer? Yes. Yes. Why? Well, let me tell you. Marginalization, generational poverty, systemic barriers, trauma, family conflict, discrimination, and colonialism. So all of these things are all factors that we all face as queer individuals, but then it factors into people who are unhoused twofold. I think of my folks who are trans and non-binary who are unhoused, and they struggle to find shelter. So that's a lot. Those are a lot of challenges. But don't worry, because there's a really simple, wonderful solution that we can do, and it's community. Whoa! Oh my God. And because we've been talking about it throughout the whole day about how community is at the core of so much of how we support each other and how we keep people engaged and how we keep people alive. And so, so I want to talk a little bit about how community goes beyond just the hi, hello. It's getting to know that person's name. It's getting to know them on a deeper level, getting to know their struggle, getting to know where they've come from. Sorry, I'm not following any of my notes. Just give me 1 second. Okay. So, why? Why is it important? When we show that we care, it creates compassion, and this compassion goes both ways. So an example is, when I first moved to Victoria, my phone died, and I asked the local folk who are unhoused, if they could tell me how to get back to my neighborhood. And they did, and they didn't ask for anything in return. It wasn't a big ordeal. It was a really simple conversation, and now I know their name, and they know my name. And now I see them in community, and I say hi, and sometimes I buy them a coffee, and we look out for each other. And that contributes to safety. That contributes to safety, contributes to community, contributes to connection. And so when we do that, we work towards dismantling these systems of oppression. And so, yeah, so talk to people a little bit more in depth, get to know who they are. So what can you do? So you can take the time to learn what is out there in regards to the resources, but also in regards to the barriers, because more often than not, like the way that our media portrays our folks who are unhoused adds stigma to the pot. So they already face systematic barriers. When people add in their own biases on top of that, it creates additional heat to the little pot of like not being supported. So you can get to know what those barriers are, and then once you know what those barriers are, you can then look to those solutions for those barriers. And then you can help support them. Help support the folks who are unhoused, either by joining community groups, community organizations, looking to nonprofits, soup kitchens, those types of things, so that way you can get engaged with them and help them more directly. And advocate. So if you don't feel comfortable, doing any of those things, you can advocate. There are so many voices in this room, so many people in this room that have the power and the capacity to be able to, take some information forward and inspire other people to look out for our unhoused community. So, with that in mind, I want you all to think about how the unhoused community, sorry, I'm on the wrong slide here, my notes. So how the unhoused community, they are self-directed care. So we are not the experts. You're not going in there. You're not telling them how to live their life. They know how to live their life. They know where the resources are. They've lived it for probably longer than you've lived here. So like going into it not as the expert, but as a community member, as a friend, as someone who's curious about another person's lifestyle. It's about building compassion, building community, not about I'm the expert. And so in that, I've learned so many strategies to moving through these social political systems, because they teach me what is out there and what is available to them. And so know your resources. So I have listed here a list of resources that you can look into in your community to better support people who are unhoused and people who are new to the city, newcomers. Like, these are excellent resources to have, but they're different from community to community. So go out, do your research, and learn some more things about your community and how you can help them. So, Nakamek, thank you, and go forth and help create community. Make a new friend.